everyone, my name is Cynthia. Let's talk books. Today I am here to talk about the next 5 books of all the reading I've been doing in 2023. So these are books 61 through 65 of the books I've been reading. So let's get right to it. Book number 61 is Sinner by Carol James Marshall. So this is the book that I found on NetGalley. Not that I need more books to read, but one of the things that I think I've been lacking, that I haven't been doing enough of, is looking through books that will be coming out in the next year or so on NetGalley, books that I want to read that are written by Latina writers, and requesting them. Now, I often get denied for my request on NetGalley, and that's totally fine. So I just started looking for books that were written by Latina writers requesting them. This was one of those, and it ended up being really good. It's YA though, so you have to like YA, I think, if you're gonna like this book. But part of the magic of this book is that it's young adult with a kind of horror twist. The story starts with Matea, who is a very young girl. We get this kind of flashback to when she was really young. She's walking with her mom in like a market, and she feels the pull of Santa Muerte. Santa Muerte is kind of the saint of death. It's death, and she's kind of worshipped by some people, especially like people that are involved in crime and things like that. That's not the theme here, but this is a girl that feels the pull of death. She feels like there's something over here calling her, at the same time that she is rejecting her mother's Catholicism. So like, is something wrong with her? Well, we flash forward to Matea is about to graduate. No, she's already graduated high school. She's a couple years after graduating. She's working. She's trying to help her family out. Her grandmother has moved in with them, and her mom works, but they need more money, and so Matea is working, and she has 2 friends that she's kind of in love with. So there is some kind of bisexual representation here. The her sexuality is never really clearly defined, but we get the sense that she might be bisexual or maybe pansexual, something along those lines. And more the pool of darkness of the Santa Muerte keeps like drawing her in. It's becoming stronger. Her mother goes to this witch woman, this curandera, who has been helping her mom keep evil away from her, but she's getting weaker, and Santa Muerte is getting stronger. And so it's got this darkness, this relationship with death that she's uncovering. It turns out there's a reason why she feels this pull towards death. At the same time though, her father, whom she never met and has no relationship with, was an indigenous man from Mexico, and she starts uncovering that maybe that indigenous element of her, although she doesn't know her father, although she was not brought up in an indigenous community, there's also that pull of something within her indigenous identity pulling her in a different direction than this darkness that is also pulling her. It's also a very gritty book in that like there's gonna be blood. Matea has a rivalry and a really strong animosity with another witch that she kind of just is going to be battling with. At the same time, there's this love. It's not even a love triangle. It's a bit of a love triangle. This mess of her love life that is happening. So if you're squeamish about body horror, this is not going to be the book for you. If you don't like things happening to animals, sacrifices, that kind of darkness, this book is not going to be for you. On the other hand, if you like any of those elements and you'd like to read it within the context of a young adult horror novel, I think this might be the book for you. I quite enjoyed it. And then from young adult horror, I finished Who's Black and Why, a hidden chapter from the 18th century invention of race, edited by Henry Louis Gates and Andrew S. Curran. So this is nonfiction, but it's also primary sources, a collection of sources from a society in France that was important enough that the sources matter, and it was also the society existed early enough before there was a kind of definitive like definition of racial and ethnic groups. And so it's really great for anybody that is looking at that early modern to modern definition of race, like how those definitions came to be. So there's a lot of intellectual history in this. I can picture myself assigning this in a class. However, I don't see myself like recommending it to a wide audience, because a large chunk of this book is the sources themselves. This intellectual society had an essay contest asking people to basically write about blackness and defining it and basically figuring out how the science of race worked. And completely ridiculous, but people wrote in, and so through these sources you can map out the different ideas that are developing and that are crystallizing about race and how to define it. Now, it's completely ridiculous because race is not a scientific element. Like, there is no gene that gives us race. There's nothing in our biology really distinguishes us along racial lines. It is a completely made up thing. It's a social construct, right? Social and cultural construct. And so what is really cool about this book is the essays written by the historians, by the academics before the sources. I think those essays really map out the importance of the documents and how what the shaky ground on which these ideas of race were developed, especially in this port city, right? This intellectual society was in a port city. So because it's in a port city in the 1700s, it has a direct connection to the slave trade. And so it's important to see how this is not just an intellectual system that develops this idea of race. It's a scientific community, and it's also the slave trade that is helping to define, or key in defining race for Europeans at this time. But because of European colonization, it's going to have such a global impact. So I did I rate this on Goodreads? I did. I rated it 5 stars as a teaching tool. I think that in terms of a wider audience, you might just want to read some of those early essays and not the sources. The sources, I didn't actually even read them, read all of them through carefully. I skimmed them. This is that kind of book where you don't need to read every single essay in there. It's for skimming and primarily, I think, for use in a classroom. So the next book that I finished was Spare by Prince Harry. I'm kind of I guess a little bit obsessed with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle and their relationship to the British monarchy. It's the whole situation, I think, I'm a little bit obsessed with it because of what it says about race in the UK, about what it says about the history of race and the monarchy, with all those things, as well as I like the whole like dramatic telenovela aspect of it, this big soap opera that is the British monarchy. And it's very rare to get this biography by one of the like upper level members of the monarchy. So I was really interested. This book is not for everyone. If you're gonna try it, I recommend the audiobook because it's read by Prince Harry, and it's really interesting to hear his voice narrate all of this. I think if you're into all of that stuff, you're gonna like it. If you're not, then you're probably not gonna like it. I liked it. I think in terms of this kind of celebrity biography, it was a decent one, and I'll leave it at that. The next book I read was Burn It Down: Power, Complicity, and the Call for Chance in Hollywood by Maureen Ryan. So started hearing about this book in the weeks leading up to its release because Ryan turned one of the chapters in this book, or a couple of the chapters in this book, into essays that were published in like Vanity Fair and I think a couple of other places. But talking about like the behind the scenes of shows, what happens behind the scenes of shows. And I knew that she was writing a chapter about Sleepy Hollow. And while I had not been a fan of Sleepy Hollow, I hadn't watched Sleepy Hollow while it aired on television, I knew enough, I followed enough people that were really into the show to know that that show was full of a ton of shenanigans. And at the time, people didn't even know all the details about it, but it was clear that its black characters were being treated really unfairly, and that the writers didn't know really what to do with the black characters in the show. Well, it turns out there was a lot of racism and a lot of really troubling abuses happening behind the scenes of that show. Same thing was happening. So Maureen's talking about a bunch of different shows. She's talking about SNL, about Lost. The Lost drama I also did not know, although having been a fan of Lost, not while it aired, but after that, having watched it on streaming, it was clear watching Lost, and I watched every episode of Lost, that there were some things happening behind the scenes, because same thing, a lot of the non-white characters are given less screen time. They're treated very oddly, even though they were very interesting characters that a lot could have been done with it. Well, it turns out there's also a lot of racism behind the scenes, and some of the actors that were in these shows actually talked to Maureen Ryan. Maureen Ryan has actually what seems like has a reputation for being a writer that really cares about some of these issues, and she talks about all of the abuses that happen behind the scenes, that especially by showrunners but also by executives, that there is this culture in Hollywood of allowing a lot of these abuses to happen, and also of protecting abusers. And this is both men and women who are, guilty of sexual harassment, sexual abuse, but also racism and just really shitty behavior. They're really terrible bosses, and they're allowed to be because people see them as being brilliant. So she talks through why this is such a huge problem and why the viewing audience should care about this. And as somebody who does care about this, like I did not need to be sold on why this is important, but I think she does a good job of explaining why these are important topics, but also, like, she talks about what we can do about it, and that coming from someone who knows how shows run, who knows how layered these things are. I thought it was really powerful, and I hope people pay attention, but honestly, I have very little hope that Hollywood will change, ultimately, because it's a money issue. Hollywood only changes if they think their bottom line is going to be affected. But that's where the audience plays a role. If we make it clear that we don't want to watch shows where there are abuses happening behind the scenes, I think that is important, that we can play that kind of role in pushing for those things. I just have become rather pessimistic about whether a majority of people actually care about those kinds of things. But the book is fantastic, like really, really fantastic. Book number 65 of the books I've read in 2023 is 19 Claws and a Blackbird by Agustine Bazterrica. So I recently talked about this book where I talked about these kind of short horror stories coming from Argentinian authors. And this is one of the latest ones. I liked some of the short stories here. I think that they involved more things like ghosts and weird things happening, but it's also, one of the things horror does really well is provide a critique of society. And one of the things that is clear in a lot of Argentinian horror is the role played by its history of dictatorships and of terrorizing the citizenry. And that, I think, is present in 19 Claws and a Blackbird. This is short enough that I think that if you want to try reading something by Agustine Bazterrica, or just reading Latin horror at all, that it's worth trying out. If you've read, Agustina Bazterrica wrote Tender is the Flesh, and it's a book that got a lot of attention because of the premise. And I think that if you like that book, or even if you didn't like that book, that you might be surprised that 19 Claws and a Blackbird is not quite like it. It is not quite as extreme in terms of the plot. I mean, the plots of horror stories do tend to be extreme, but even within the context of horror, I think Tender is the Flesh kind of is in a different kind of box than a lot of these stories. A lot of these stories tend to be a little bit more traditional in terms of the horror genre, and very short, which worked for me at times and did not work for me at other times. But I'm also somebody that has a hard time with short stories and novellas, because the ones I like tend to be like, not enough, I'm not getting enough of what I like, and then others are not long enough for me to really like them. So this is one where I think I liked it overall, the book, but it was not a love for me. It's not one of my favorite books of the year, but it's worth picking up and giving it a chance if you're interested in any of these kinds of themes and topics, because it is so short and because it's short stories. So there we go. So the next 5 books on the list of books that I'm reading in 2023. Again, the theme of horror. If you watch my most recent video, which is the mid-year book freakout tag, it is very clear that the theme in my 2023 reading right now that's emerging is horror. Lots of horror. I'm kind of really enjoying it. So if anybody has any horror recommendations, especially if they are Latin horror, please send them my way. But any recommendations, I will take them all. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.